All right, go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out. My name is Dwayne Goetzel. I'm the moderator for this fine panel that we have before you today. I'm a lawyer from Austin, Texas. A little sad today because we got drubbed by Ohio State, but that's a different issue. I'm going to just go down the line, let everyone briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll get started on the subject.
I'm Ron Daniels. I'm a lawyer in Middle Georgia. I have what you would call a general practice. I handle basically anything that comes in the door. Triage it. If it's not something I know anything about, I find somebody that can help you. The biggest areas of my practice have been representing consumers in Fair Debt Collection Practices Act cases, and Fair Credit Reporting Act cases, representing some county governments and some state agencies. And since we brought up that game in Ohio, I will just say them dogs is hell, don't they?
I think your proper response to that is the hell with Georgia. All right, so my name is Xavier Ashe, as you can hear. I'm a Georgia Tech grad, but also 30 years experience in computer engineering, computer hacking. I've been doing a lot of the local hacking scene and privacy advocacy. A big supporter of EFGA and EFF. And just really happy to talk about this topic and love to see all your shining happy faces tonight. You'll be out there partying. We're here talking about, computer geek and stuff. I just love it. So thank you.
My name is Amon, Otis Poston. I build tools to combat authoritarian regimes, and I'm focused on North Korea. That's it.
Hey y'all, I'm Sarah Phillips. I use she, they pronouns. I'm a campaigner at Fight for the Future. We're a tech justice and digital rights organization that runs national campaigns fighting back against censorship and surveillance. My work primarily is around abortion surveillance, free expression online, and LGBTQ youth and how they interact with the internet. I'm also from Texas. I'm based in Texas and also went to UT, so I'm also a little sad today. So thanks for being here.
All right, thanks, everyone. We're here to discuss the TikTok ban and why it backfired. So, Ron, I'm going to start with you. Just give a brief overview of the process, the ban, the law, what happened.
So anytime you really want to talk about that, you go back to an executive order that was issued in, I think it was middle of 2022 by President Trump, which was essentially a response to this idea that TikTok was owned in part by Chinese company. He could just simplify and say it was owned by China. And he did this ban and tried to ban it overnight, essentially through an executive order that quickly got turned over and said, no, you can't do that. That's not something the President of the United States can do, even if it's national security concern. And so Congress decided that, hey, this seems dangerous. This is a Chinese-owned company, and Chinese companies, they are subject to the laws of China, which say that the Chinese government says you got to give us data, they have to comply. And so Congress got scared and in somewhat of a bipartisan fashion said, all right, well, let's ban this thing. And what they did was essentially say, in particular, TikTok, ByteDance, the parent company, ultimately in China, they had some hearings, and after some hearings, they said, here's what this law is going to do. We are going to order you to either sell or stop existing. We'll just ban the platform. And by the way, we're not just going to do this to you. We're also going to add some stuff in here in the wall for other companies too, and other platforms. If we find that they're owned by foreign entities that have some sort of national security concern, we could do the same thing to them. So it's kind of a two-headed monster. Well, that gets sent up to the United States Supreme Court. And in January of 2025, I think Justice Gorsuch notes that they basically had a fortnight to consider the pleadings and those things. They consider it and they say, well, this is kind of unusual. I think that's the best way to describe how they viewed it in the opinion. It's kind of interesting as a lawyer to read justices talking about something I use, because I use TikTok, and how they describe it in their sort of arcane and antique way of describing computers and technology. And they go through the analysis and say, well, we're going to subject this to intermediary scrutiny. It's content neutral, the law, even though it's specifically targeting this one company. We're just going to go intermediate scrutiny. And all of them said, okay, you know what, this is constitutional. You can do this because we just don't like, the idea that some foreign country could say, we're going to take all the data and there's some national security interest. And so what then happens is President Trump, again, he's back, says, wait a minute, these people on TikTok and people that are affiliated with TikTok, they helped get me elected. And the people really do not like this idea of a TikTok ban, so I'm just going to put a pause on it. And that is where we are today.
Thank you. So I'm going to go down to the end and jump around here. Sarah, any theories as to why, other than what Ron said cynically, as to why Trump was against it before he was for it? Spin out some reasons, maybe some conspiracy theories why he's in favor of it now.
Why he's in favor of not
banning it, yeah.
Because he reacts, like he's reactionary. He saw that he got similar to what Ron said, he saw that he got love for stopping the enforcement. People were calling, people were enraged. He loves harnessing rage. He loves harnessing people's frustration. And I think one of the interesting things being on the side of we were trying to stop the TikTok ban, I campaigned on this for years, is that I found myself being like, yeah, we should stop the enforcement with this. It was really interesting. It was really interesting how it played out. And I just think politically also, there was a moment where TikTok actually put a notification on everybody's screen before the ban went actually down, put a notification on everyone's screen, call Congress. And they got a flood of calls from people. Don't ban TikTok. We're so angry, blah, blah, blah. And the reaction from lawmakers, largely in Congress, was to brush it off, was basically this is inflammatory. This is hysteria. This is exactly why we need to ban TikTok, which I think politically is very interesting to have thousands and thousands of people calling you and then just be like, this is hysteria. I think it's circumstance of the current state of American politics and Congress in a lot of ways. But Trump looked at that and was like, oh, there's energy here. I love when people love me for anything, right? And he harnessed it. And no matter how I feel about that in particular, I think that he just goes where the love is, right?
Xavier, given your background, is there any actual genuine reason why everyone was in Congress in particular was so quick to go along with the idea of, yeah, let's ban this? Is there anything there? And I guess a different way of asking is TikTok doing anything that other social media platforms aren't doing that we really ought to be concerned about?
So yes and no. So one of the things is that there is we generally, if we rewind ourselves a couple of months, maybe about a year or so, there's a general feeling like we could trust our technology companies to generally be most of them are West Coast, California. They've got this idealism and Facebook and whatnot. And then there's Google used to have the thing, don't be evil, right? And so we said, oh, Google, they've got all of our data, but they're not good guys, right? So yes, Google then steals all of our data, Facebook steals all of our data, and TikTok steals all of our data. And the scary thing is that TikTok, any country in China has to deal with Chinese laws. And so they, it's that ability to kind of tap into that and the hysteria that kind of goes around with that, thinking that is bad. It's okay that Mark Zuckerberg has the same amount of data, but the fact that it's a foreign entity and they're so weird they're over there, right? Everybody read their 1984. So this is the kind of the dichotomy that they stood up. It's like, this is bad, but it's only bad when Chinese companies do it. Don't look at the American companies, and that's where it was kind of hard to swallow as a privacy advocate. Is like, hey, I get the anger. We should be angry about this. We shouldn't allow us to profile our likes and our dislikes along with all the the information that gathers from our phones. But let's do this across the board, right? Let's use this anger toward Chinese, use of our data and say, hey, let's get a privacy bill in there. Let's actually define what it is that we want privacy. We haven't seen that yet, right? It's like they told the story is that, well, everybody said don't really want it, and you know, the waves have gone back to the other side to keep allowing this type of technology. But yeah, there's really is not very much difference. And the only one that I see is pretty clear is there's been some really good studies, and thinking that we're donating to NAMI today, is that the particular algorithm at TikTok, I believe, is very detrimental to people that have challenging psychological issues, the depression, anxiety, self-image issues, eating disorders, things like that. Anything that is a vice that will cause more interaction will get get inflated. And so if somebody, if a kid is struggling with any of those issues, it is proven over and over again that TikTok will help exacerbate those bad things. And so, yeah, so I do think that from a data collection point of view, it's just as evil as Mark's empire. But the algorithm is a little bit, to me, a little bit more evil than some of the other platforms out there.
Amon, I'm interested in your perspective, given specifically what you do. What are your thoughts about kind of the pro or con with respect to TikTok platform itself?
So the pro or con of the platform.
Should it, like, for example, should it be banned? Should it not be banned? What are you seeing given kind of what you do for a living?
Okay, so for me, the reason it should not be banned is because if it is banned, it sets a precedent for what we allow, like what we categorize app development, what we categorize software development in general. I think that's dangerous because what might happen is that maybe some like scope creep. I don't know the legal term, but like yes, let's.
Like it can apply elsewhere. It's like
Slippery slope. Yeah, slippery slope is what I'm looking for. So what could happen is like, okay, so first it's going to be this specific app, then it's going to be apps that do this specific thing, and then it's going to be apps written in this specific language. And once we kind of go down this road, I don't know how we're going to reverse. And what makes that scary for me is that we have to use these tools, we may have to use these tools against our own government. This is where I think I'm looking at it from, because I'm thinking about in North Korea, they don't have access to certain things because the regime has prevented them from having access. And so I'm concerned that if we go down that road, what will happen? Can we build these tools anymore?
Ron, legally speaking, what does the law say with respect to banning TikTok? Because as you noted, the law is technically still in effect. It's passed, it's upheld by the Supreme Court, and you have one person going, nah, never mind, which we'll get to later as far as the huge danger of that.
Because I want to talk about that.
But the law itself, I mean, you have all of these penalties and so forth, and technically firms are in violation of it. So expand on that a little bit if you can.
Yeah, so it's kind of fascinating what Congress did from a legal perspective, because it's, I don't know of another situation where they have written a law that says this specific company has to either disgorge itself of being a Chinese company and become an American company and just get rid of all of that, or sell itself, or you can't exist. Nobody can have access to you. And that's fascinating because I think as lawyers and the judiciary all struggle with it, because where's the First Amendment issue? The First Amendment issue is, in theory, the company, TikTok, the American company, they, as an American citizen, because of Citizens United, they have a First Amendment right to speech, but they're not actually creating the speech. They're just platforming the speech. They're hosting it and they're publishing it. Then you have all these creators who largely are American citizens that were joining in with the amicus briefs, and they clearly have First Amendment rights, but we sort of sidestep that because we're not talking about necessarily taking away what they're saying and preventing them from saying it. We're just saying you can't do it through this medium that's owned by a foreign entity, and so it's all rather intriguing as a lawyer, just because it's so novel. It's not, it would be different entirely if they just said, we think there's a national security concern here, and because of that, we're just going to say no. We're denying you access to United States citizens, and we're going to, pursue you through means of and sanctions and things like that. But instead, it's like, well, you can sell yourself to an American company and become Americans, by God. Or you can just prove that you're not Chinese. And what really is peculiar, and Gorsuch mentions this in there was two justices who wrote concurring opinions. Gorsuch wrote I believe he only concurred in the judgment. And what was fascinating was the government, Merrick Garland, they attempted to present evidence to the United States Supreme Court that nobody else got to see, which is just, as a lawyer, runs afoul of everything. How do you litigate when you don't get to see the evidence? I mean, it's just, what's in the box? I don't know what's in the box.
I'm not gonna start.
That's that's the extreme level, right? You're hard lawyering, and then there's upgraded, right?
Yeah.
You blind.
I mean, and just to speak on that politically a little bit, like in terms of how this played out, because again, we were like pushing back against this like every day for months, and we asked offices, we asked people who supposedly had insider information on what that was, and it was no. I mean, like I can't say for sure. None of it. The answer kept saying that people kept saying was like it could be used. There was it's like very vague language. There was nothing concrete that people said. And again, like what we said, and we also joined with a Backfired human rights organization in China to say like release the information. Like if there actually is something on the table that Americans should know about this company that they use all the time, release it. What are you actually talking about here? And this was an issue also like on Biden's plate for a long time. Like I think we're talking about Trump, but it was also on Biden's plate during that period where he could have released the information. His administration could have released it if it existed. So every office, Congress was talking about it in these amorphous terms, and also just grandstanding on the issue in general. I mean, I can't emphasize enough how much these people don't know what they're talking about when it comes to data in general. And I think a lot of people, just in terms of the public, saw during these hearings how little they know about Wi-Fi, about, I think everyone saw that one, about data, about social media. Yeah, and I think that and just in terms of the public, it really casts, this idea that these people don't know what they're talking about. We don't believe them because you can't even define what it is you're worried about. I just wanted to bring that in. Like there's what's on the table, what actually happened, and then there's also how the public was seeing this because there was nothing substantial, concrete being offered.
I think that one of the things that we had was folks like Meta, really showing our political leaders, here is all this data we have, right? All the activities that are performed on Instagram and all the different Meta, Facebook and all of that insights can be fed into the politicians and shown, and this is very powerful data. But they didn't have access to all the TikTok data, right? That was somebody else. And this really, couldn't you just see, Mark Zuckerberg sitting there going, I want it all. Like I can give you all this data on how good you are, Mr. Trump, right? But I can't, but everybody's using this stupid tool called TikTok because we can't compete, and so therefore you've got to be able to, you've got to do something. And I think there was a lot of this, like, we don't know for sure that ByteDance and was giving the government this, these right? So we didn't have any of that, or none of that evidence has really been released out to the public. But that, we already know what American companies can do. So we can just go ahead and fill in the blanks. It's like, here's what the Chinese companies are doing.
Amon, I want you to expand on that a little bit, given your work with North Korea. You talked in an earlier panel about what North Koreans do with our data. So let's just assume, for example, that China actually was siphoning off this data to use for a specific purpose. Give us some examples from your experience of how this data can be misused that maybe was underlying the reason, although I agree with everyone else that the policymakers don't really know. But in theory, what could have been a justification?
So, okay, North Korea, when they hack, they like to get to know you personally. They find as many details about you as they can. What car you drive, what kind of bike you have, anything that they can use to become your friend. Because they know if they become your friend, they don't have to do any sophisticated hack at all. They just need to ask you to tell them something. And if they can get you to trust them, then they're in. So hypothetically, let's say if China were to have access to this information, well, like your feed on TikTok, I mean, the algorithm on TikTok is so targeted and so specific that it can send you information about things that you didn't even know that you'd be curious about.
I think they're getting to your microphone right now.
I see that. So I guess one of the things that make this like one of the things that would be possible is that if they had this gigantic data set about the things that you look at, how much time you spend looking at it. I mean, they're in. Like they know exactly what to say. They know how to formulate an email. They know how to reach out to you and say like, "Hey, you like pugs?" Like whatever they need to do in order to get in, or what game you like to play, what game you want to play, and they send you a little coupon code for that exact game, and they're in. And that's the game that they play. I mean, both China and North Korea play this kind of game. But also, they can send you very specific propaganda to sway your opinion one way or the other about some political thing. That nothing's off the table for these threat actors.
I would just note this older information, but that's exactly how Brexit happened. They targeted block by block by block and figured out that if you are most concerned about immigration, for example, or losing your job, they knew by virtue of social media and all of this online information that we willingly give away, and I'm just as guilty as anyone else of the convenience, instant gratification. We are giving up a lot by virtue of that convenience, but it results in very real, depending on your perspective, bad results like Brexit. And that was caused by them targeting block by block by block so they could identify who's anti-immigration and these people are coming for your jobs, therefore we better separate from Europe. So I kind of view this as a very similar kind of scare tactic thing for TikTok, that it's interesting that they're, in theory, they could be using the data, but there's no evidence of it. No evidence has been revealed, right?
Well, and I think that also, in this exercise, right, we're talking about if they have the data, right? Everyone has data. I think that's the other thing that I constantly was trying to make clear to opposites, whether or not they knew or were willfully not listening to, and or just ignoring in favor of the national security hype around the TikTok ban, is that if China or North Korea or other bad actors, and a bad actor does not have to be a foreign entity, it could be your landlord or your boss or an abusive ex-partner or the American government, which wants to surveil you and have your information so they can criminalize you for any manner of things, right? So I think that's one thing that I just wanted to bring into the room, is that there are many different ways you can be endangered by your data, but that data is for sale, right? Because of Google and YouTube and TikTok, as we talked about, they are all acting in this way where they're collecting our data and putting it up for sale. That means that China has access to that data if we're only talking about China or North Korea, but also any manner of bad actors. And so what we constantly were saying was, if this is actually a problem for you, whether it just be that you're concerned with national security, then pass comprehensive data privacy legislation so none of these apps can do this, right? Singling out TikTok, it doesn't solve the problem. TikTok itself, China, like all of these people can have your data because it's out there, because the American government has passed the buck on protecting you. So it's there. We don't actually need to like write the fantasy of what it could be because it's out there.
Anyone else have anything they want to jump in on that? All right.
Can I say,
Whoops.
I think sometimes this sort of information is like when people receive it, it's like, oh, somebody out there might be affected, but it would never happen to me. I'm not special enough. I don't have. I'm not connected to a billion-dollar company. Why would they try to hack me? But every day, somebody gets like. So I'll give you a specific example. Like recently, North Korea contacted this like nail salon. This person running a nail salon and told them like, hey, you set up a couple of laptops that we can just sort of VPN into and do what we got to do. Like we'll pay you $500 a month. They're like, great, that's extra revenue. So they set it up, and it became like this. It became an entry point for hacks for some years. These people were like heavily fined by the FBI. I think one of them might have even gone to prison for doing this because they colluded. They broke international sanctions, and so just that like little act of like knowing that your business isn't doing as good as it could, and like, hey, how much money do you think we can offer them to like set up a laptop? Oh, probably $500. And like all this contextual information is stuff that you could get just by understanding what they're scrolling, because they're probably looking at business information. They're probably looking at, this information is available. So if they have access to it, it is a huge problem that affects regular people, not just billions or high like companies.
Yeah, it's probably easier to steal from the smaller individuals than it is from the billionaires anyway. Right?
Sure.
Well, I want to play devil's advocate here because Trump has said, no, we're not going to do anything with this. While at the same time, he has still been talking about, well, we're looking for buyers and we're going to proceed with that. Interestingly enough, and this hasn't been publicly revealed, but there have been suspicions that the people or entities that he is talking about who have expressed an interest in purchasing some or all of TikTok are some of his largest donors. I don't see a conflict of interest there at all. Anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, you just gotta look at who was sitting behind him during the inauguration, right? It was all of the technology companies. You had, Oracle and IBM had, and Mark was up there, and it's one of these where it's absolutely right. We gotta tie it together and be able to point out that where is the range, right? Is it that are we mad at the privacy aspect of it? Great, let's jump on that and let's talk about that and let's actually like make something happen with that. Is this just xenophobia, right? It's like they've got the power to do this and we don't, and this is more control and invested interest in American companies. And I unfortunately my cynicism wins out to say there's probably more to fund American companies winning the dominance, right? If we can't win by playing fair, we change the rules, right? So I think that's what we're seeing.
Could there possibly be also that if someone that's in charge of the administration, his friends or major donors control that platform, that it gives another outlet for his own purposes or her own purposes? Let's talk generally.
I do think so. I mean, the amount of sway that social media companies have played in American culture is massive, and the idea that we're losing control of that is scary for people that are in control right now that can actually affect outcomes to elections and other types of public policy. And so, yeah, if you have been successful at being able to influence the world by your platform, but now you can't compete with this foreign entity, and they're able to do their own thing. This is just power play, right? It's who is going to be in control and being able to influence elections and influence public policy.
Ron, I want to ask you, before we get to the really big precedent issue here, and that is, why would China agree to this? And does that set a really bad precedent for American companies? If China were to say, okay, Apple or Nvidia, for example, in order to operate in China, you have to divest 10% or 20%, whatever, to Chinese ownership. Isn't it rather short-sighted to insist on those kind of terms, knowing that someone might then turn them against us?
No, it's absolutely short-sighted. I mean, that's the whole argument about tariffs is that you get locked in this to borrow the Cold War terminology, it's mutually assured destruction. At some point in time, if all the major countries in the world said pass similar laws, that means only 10 of them could have a bite in it. I mean, at some point in time, you're getting to the where it's just not a workable solution at all. And I think too, it just historically, uh, China China doesn't see the problem. China doesn't care. China's not going to react the same way because that's not how China acts. We've got a pretty good we've got a pretty good analysis of how international relations work. Um, Usually people act in a certain way. We can kind of predict that. Sometimes there are things that happen that are unpredictable, but for the most part, you are constraining choices, and people generally, on that sort of grand scale, act logically until you get to the point where you have a world war. So practically, that's just not a workable solution. And that's really what it boils down to because China says 10%. Japan says 10%, Russia 10%, United States says 10%. We'll forget about Canada and Mexico. England, you just pick 8 more countries and then say, well, we all want a piece of it. And at some point, that just doesn't work.
Yeah, it kind of becomes a race to the bottom, right?
Yeah.
Sarah, you mentioned something earlier that you were contacting others in offices and so forth with respect to this and saying why it was unworkable or why it was a bad idea. Expand on that a little bit more because I know with your line of work, social media can be important. It can be really useful despite all of the downsides that it also can present. So do you have kind of mixed feelings about this?
I have a lot of mixed feelings about it. I mean, I think that I kind of alluded to it at first, but the weirdest part about this situation was that I was finding myself on the side of TikTok, which is a surveillance capitalist, data collection, data mining behemoth that I politically don't believe should exist, right? And I also use TikTok to get people to take action on campaigns that are super important every single day. And both of those things are true, right? Because I work in a space where I need to go to where people are, where TikTok is where people are. And also, I don't believe TikTok should have the business model that it has. And so it is a really complicated question, but that's why I believe that it's not about, like just going at TikTok, going at it here. Like, let's pass the actual comprehensive legislation that we need for all of these apps to work the way that we need them to. And also the ability to build other platforms that don't function this way, but can still compete. And I think that particularly with TikTok, what we saw is that I work mainly with young people who are on the internet a lot, who use the internet for political action, who are fighting against censorship. And one of the particular things that happened with TikTok is that it was packaged in with defense. It was packaged in with funding, military funding. And so even though it was a highly unpopular bill, they knew it was highly unpopular. They packaged it in with legislation that they knew senators couldn't vote against because in the United States. We don't vote against military funding, which I think that's also just part of it, right? Like TikTok was presented as a national security threat. We don't say no to more military funding for more and more war. My boss has this saying that she says all the time. It's like there's nothing more bipartisan than more censorship and more bombs. Like, and I think that this is like the exact situation, right? Like packaging the TikTok ban in with this. And so politically it was interesting, and also, yeah, it's just complicated. I think like the situation on TikTok where people were so angry specifically that this is what they were focusing on, right? Like young people are dealing with a climate crisis, gun violence, they can't pay their debt off, like they are not convinced they can own homes, like they don't have health care, and they're watching their Congress people focus on banning the app where they talk to their friends about things that they like and political speech, right? In the weeks before the TikTok ban actually got wrapped up into military funding, the talk on the Hill was about Israel and Palestine. I'm going to be so blunt. Like that's what was the conversation was about. TikTok has a lot more pro-Palestine content from young people who were protesting, who were in the streets during those 6 months, right? That was the context on the Hill. That's what the lobbyists were talking about. That's what we were all like sandwiched in, right? Not only is it getting wrapped up into military funding and funding for Israel, but also the conversation was we need to ban TikTok because it's not conducive to our foreign policy, right? And so in the same conversation where they're talking about China warping our messaging and warping, us for propaganda, they're talking about banning an app because we're not saying what they want, like what they want us to say, right? So there's a lot of things here, and again, it's really complicated because TikTok should not exist the way that it does. But there's other avenues, right, that we have been privacy folks have been talking about since before I knew any of these words, right? Like there are folks who've been doing this and saying the same thing for years and years and years, and no one listens until you say the word China. Like that's what it's been.
I want to throw out, for example, expanding on that issue of privacy. Europe, for example, has a general data privacy law that when that was passed, a lot of companies here said, oh, well, we're doing business outside the United States, so we're going to go ahead and adhere to the European standard, even though we don't have a national data privacy law here. Is that kind of what you're talking about, and this is open to anyone, would that sort of overarching law with respect to data privacy help us with respect to the social media platforms like TikTok?
Good God, yes. Yeah, I mean, it's getting the definition of privacy is one of these things that's pretty tough, because once you get down to the nuts and bolts of how which fields, right? Is it your birthday? Is it your is it your name? Is it your social security number, right? And figuring out at what point, I've got to have these 3 combinations of data to make it now this is private data, right? If I have just one, it's not private. And getting down to that level, like the people that are hitting the keyboards to make this stuff real, it's a hard line to draw. And when you've got a situation with that we've currently got with you've got European it's got this one precedent. California set another pretty heavy precedent. We've got other different states that are all competing, and we still don't have a good solid idea of what privacy means, and especially not with the current capabilities of AI, right? And that has really changed the conversation a whole lot, where governments used to be able to sit there and say, hey, we can talk about data in a very specific and describable manner, and this is now private data and this is not. But once you start putting everything into an AI model, right, you don't have that type of data segregation. And so the idea of concepts of what is private goes is where the debate is. And being able to sit there and to try to decide as a state, as a country, or as a multinational conglomeration, trying to figure out together what we want to define as privacy is really important. And as we push it forward with new policy, we're going to have to get get in line with coming up with a standard so that we can start moving forward.
Part of the problem, I guess, is that we are all, and again, I'm just as guilty as anyone else, giving all this data away for free in the name of convenience. So is there really any privacy? Or is it kind of an opt-in, opt-out that if I'm ignorant as to what I'm doing, I should be given the choice, of opting in so that it's protected from the outset versus trying to claw it all back? This is open to anyone who has an idea there.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of these that once the data exists, it can be used, right? And understanding that the ability to now, at scale, take every single GPS coordinate that's collected by every single phone that TikTok is installed on and analyze in a way that you can then actually glean intelligence from that data from how many people are going to work at military bases to understanding who works at goes into military think tanks and who are those high value targets. These are this analysis is capable now, and so being able to understand that is to where you want to start making decisions about how you would like to interact with technology, right? And figuring out that balance of, hey, I want to be able to stay connected with the community. I want to be able to stay connected with my friends, right? But what does that mean, and what kind of exchanges are you able to make, right? I left Meta products a couple of years back. I'm like, hey, I'm a privacy expert, but here I am on Facebook, right? Okay, so I stood up for myself, and it was hard, right? And I never tell anybody who's like they get scared and think about taking away Instagram. Most of my friends and families, it's just scary stuff to be. I'm now disconnected from my community. So as a privacy advocate, I'm saying, hey, let's find out and find other ways. Saying we don't want to be on a global platform. We want to build communities. We want technology that we can trust and be able to defend, right? And figuring and getting this message out there. You going and talking to your friends, right? You're spending your evening talking about this technology here at DragonCon, right? You can then go and talk to your friends and family and say, hey, this is what it means, right? This is why we talk about privacy, is that, these things are happening. And so I'm thinking that we should probably move over to this other, technology that might be more user friendly, more privacy friendly, or, has data that is not stored in the cloud, right? Or, I'm setting up a service in my home as opposed to trying to connect to a cloud service, right? These choices is where we're starting to move away from, depending on the big technology to keep us connected. And we decide as ourselves to say, hey, we're going to build our own communities with our own technology that doesn't have anything to do with the surveillance state.
Amon, any thoughts on that?
Well, that's exactly, so I was gonna say, why this issue matters to me is because, these sort of localized applications that don't do this surveillance harvesting and all that can be built by individuals right now using our own free speech. If this TikTok ban sets a precedent, that might change in the future. So I think it's really important to either identify applications that align more with the direction you would like to see in terms of regulation, or like in terms of fair data practices, or like safe data practices, or make the application you would like to see, which is a lot simpler right now in the modern world than you might think.
This is something that we hinted at earlier, and if it could be even more horrifying, I want to jump to kind of this bigger picture of having a law that's passed that is upheld by the Supreme Court only for a single individual to decide we're not going to adhere to that. As a lawyer, for me, you take away rule of law, all bets are over. We have total chaos, you have God knows what. So, Ron, I know you have strong feelings on this.
And there's two very, I think, very fighting against each other feelings inside of me about it. Because on one hand, you have a government that is clearly responding to the will of the electorate, right? You've got the person who says, we're just going to put a pause on this, that was elected by the people, and is responding to what the people are saying, and to some degree that, hey, we really don't want this. On the other hand, you have the government that's also elected by the same people that passed this law that was also listening to that, and that's their job. We elect that part of the government to make the laws. We elect the president or the executive of the government to enforce the laws. And the two parts of me that are struggling, like, well, I like democracy. I think it's great. I think more people should be involved and we should express our opinions. And the government should do what we tell them to do. I know that's a novel concept. The other side of me says, if we just have a law out there that we got one guy that says we're not going to enforce it, what in the name of God do we do with anything? Katie barred the door, really, and I get really upset. In Georgia, we have a law still in the books that says it is illegal for you to have a relationship outside of your marriage, and you can be prosecuted for it. Though it's been held unconstitutional. Guess what? It's still on the books. It makes no sense to me for there to be a law on the books that's unconstitutional. Similarly, it makes no sense to me that if the will of the people is, hey, we don't want this banned, Congress needs to get off their duff and do it. They just need to undo it. And that would make sense. But instead, we have this sort of quagmire that the president could decide in 2 weeks' time that, nobody really cares about this, so we are going to enforce it. And then you get in this whole situation where you elect another president in 4 years and they say, well, we're going to enforce this law, but not that law. And, I don't care that Congress was elected. We're just going to do this. And that's problematic as a lawyer. It's problematic as a citizen. And so there is this broader issue of, if we're going to have laws, shouldn't they be enforced? Even if I disagree with them.
Exactly.
So I got a question for you, Ron.
Okay.
Okay. Because I'm having trouble figuring out what I think the line would be. So at what point do you believe TikTok would have been so powerful and dangerous that it would have been justified for it to be banned by one person, like an emergency ban?
I don't think there is a line like that. Now I will say this, good brother from Georgia Tech, he said something that concerns me about what this could be used, and nobody's talked about it, is I could theoretically see a bad actor, not necessarily the Chinese government, but just a bad actor taking this algorithm that we know can cause people who have mental health issues and target what they see as content and cause them to cause harm to themselves or to others. And that concerns me. That's how you weaponize a platform like this to do bad things. And there are bad actors out there who want to do bad things. We know that. Not all people are nice. And so, I don't know that we've reached that line. I think probably actually seeing that happen would be the point in time where I would say, you got to do something, but I still don't know that I would say that you got to do what we did. Like, I don't know that that's the right solution no matter what the problem is.
And I'll also say that, like, in terms of like body image, for example, like eating disorder content on Instagram is like a hot topic in tech policy spaces. And the answer that I often give is that is powered by the data collection. I feel like I'm data right now, but like that algorithm that you're talking about is powered by the data collected by us. And so when we talk about like content based, I've become more and more of a free speech absolutist in this space, because the question of what this content actually looks like, I don't think we can come at it from the content side. Right? I think we have to come at it from the data collection, from the privacy aspect, because you can curb that algorithm by curbing the data that powers it, right? So you don't have to play whack-a-mole with this app is pushing this content, this app is pushing this content, this could do this, if you've done the right protection on the other side.
Content moderation, whole nother.
Yeah, whole other topic, sorry.
I want to throw it open to questions now. So if you have your question, you've thought about it, please line up at the microphone and get to you if we can. Go right ahead.
So something that I thought of that was interesting about this that I didn't hear talked about much is the way the ban was actually implemented is it said American tech companies can't provide services to TikTok. You can't have it in your app store. You can't host it on your servers. But there's nothing saying they can't host a website overseas that Americans can access. They can't host, an APK that I can download to my Android phone from their own website. And I'm interested in the panel's reaction to that. We didn't see them try that approach, but they could have.
Still,
It would look at them.
There's no Great Firewall of America that
But
keeps you from accessing TikTok.com.
an ISP, right, would be an American tech company that would also not be able to collude with that website, so they couldn't serve it.
Well, just by existing as an ISP, I mean, they can't serve you, say, child pornography either, but when the US government wants to shut down someone who's doing that, they don't go to the ISP and say, you have to block this, even when they know about it. There are websites out there with some bad stuff on them hosted in places that we don't have legal jurisdiction.
Yeah, that it goes back to the broadband laws. Is basically the content providers are supposed to not filter that. That like I said, another good legal topic is whether or not that those in place or not. But the reality is real. Is that, what does it mean to actually block TikTok? And what are all those technical controls that we would have to put in place, like asking ISPs to block stuff? Right, these are things that we haven't done before, and you're right. It's like the actual beyond deciding to actually block it, and then what are the actual ways that we're going to implement that block is another kind of layer on that, and that's where it gets into some of the scarier stuff. Is that we just don't do that right now as with our current layer of regulation.
I'll also just offer that you have to consider that one, TikTok doesn't want to take on liability for Americans actually accessing the app because that results in fines of, I think it was like $5,000 per American user that accesses TikTok regardless, which is why when the question of VPN usage came up, it was that they were just going to shutter it because they don't want to take that on. And also TikTok, it's about TikTok strategy also. In this case, they are being censored by the US government, but they're not a rebellious open source. They're not a movement or website that's being censored. They're a capitalist company, right? And so they want to comply in the way that they can make the most money, and people aren't going to access it in the millions if that's the way that they have to access it, right? And that's what TikTok's most interested in.
thank you.
There was mention in the debate here, and also when it was going on in Congress, that all this data is, if the Chinese government or anyone else wanted this data, they could get it through other means. You don't need to go through TikTok. Is there special data that TikTok or other companies have that isn't available in that form? Like I think Amazon, for example, uses your data but doesn't sell it. Are there things like that potentially would change the logic?
Well, the thing is that really there's only American companies that generally drive this, right? There isn't a European Facebook, right?
Mhm.
There isn't we do see other type of localized social media platforms that are a little bit smaller, right? Southeast Asia, Africa, Central America, right? We see other platforms there, but nothing can compete. And as soon as you could compete with Facebook, that's when the ban was to consider, right? So now you're now taking away the data that should be going into Facebook.
But I guess it's more about along the lines of what could the Chinese government or anyone, what could they access already without having to get their fingers into into TikTok?
I'm not aware of any special data or knowledge that they have that other platforms don't have also.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so there's probably no way you can cover this in however long you have left. But I was wondering if any of you had heard about the M2 app, they were discussing but I've barely seen it on the internet, so this doesn't make sense. It's developed by Brightwave. It's an alternative TikTok app for the US, and supposedly it would result in the migration of US users to that app. And so it's supposedly be a US version of TikTok. But then, of course, there comes worries with that. It's great, so that's just censorship. You're just giving us an alternative, but then it's controlled. or managed by the US government or like in some way like censored by the US government, and you're like, great, so that's just, you're just gonna stop pushing content that you don't like, right? But I was wondering if you had heard about it or if you knew about it, or like, is that a possibility? I think like it said that it could come around, September when they like end up with that contract over, so.
I mean, I was gonna say, isn't ByteDance the problem?
Yeah,
So,
it's the owner of TikTok, yeah.
so even if ByteDance produced another application, that wouldn't necessarily solve the problem, because their data centers are already not in China. And as far as I know, actually, China only possesses less than 20% of ByteDance. So the issue isn't that the TikTok app is specifically Chinese. It's more like that ByteDance is in part invested in China.
And it's kind of weird because when we say that it's owned partially by China, it's not actually like the Chinese government that owns part of it. What they do in China and a lot of other countries is they invest pension money in companies that are making money. And that's pretty smart in some ways. There's actually some solar panel companies that China has about an 18% ownership in it, but it's not actually the Chinese government owning it. It's like the police pension fund that owns 18%, but it looks like it's owned by China.
Yeah, and just to say that, like, I fully expect that date to be pushed back again. Like, I think I'm just gonna be honest, like, I think there's a lot of things being floated, a lot of conversations. I don't know definites on anything. I've heard a lot of the same things I think you have. But I don't expect that we're gonna, like, in the next few weeks, see a sudden change. Unless Trump wakes up one day and sees they're on TikTok about himself.
Yeah, I definitely didn't consider that. I definitely didn't consider the fact that they were like, guys, we're gonna make a US only app, and then everybody can migrate to US to all the US users can migrate to this app, but then like it's still the same problem. I didn't really connect that, but everybody's just like I've only seen like a couple TikToks where they're like, guys, we're gonna have to migrate to this platform, so don't even try and grow on here because then you're gonna have to go over here. Like,
this is kind of also misinformation.
oh sure,
Like,
sure.
I mean, I felt like why online on TikTok, being someone who's like vested in this, I was like, hey y'all, none of this is like,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, while you're wanting to do political education on it and give people options, like there's a lot.
Yeah, I just thought it was odd that like it was like only those two TikToks, and then I looked it up and it was just one article. I was like, so some people are freaking out about this, but some people don't even know. Yeah, but thanks.
Thanks.
Last question.
Yep.
I had a little bit of a question more about the legal side of like, was there any defense that this might have been monopolistic or anything from this specific law? Because it seems a bit monopolistic to effectively target one major company with a law. Like, was there any conversation by any lawyers on this part?
Yeah, so that was actually a large part of the argument was that this is, you're picking on just this one company. And they did kind of a half-hearted effort, I would say, of making it, this two-headed law, it specifically does target this company. Like, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But also, here's this other part that does the same thing roughly to other companies that might be in a similar spot. So, in the United States Supreme Court essentially said, we're still going to apply intermediary scrutiny, and we're not going to. We think this is content neutral, and that in reality, I think the law itself is content neutral in terms of infringing upon free speech, because it's not saying speech this speech is bad. It's rather it says that we are concerned about national security because of the relations that we have with another country that has an ownership interest in this company. So it's not really the content of the speech. It's the ownership of the company that's making the speech that's the problem they're identifying. So it probably is content neutral, but that only matters if it's intermediary scrutiny. If it's strict scrutiny, then it doesn't really matter if it's content neutral or not.
The
So
other thing I was going to add is our government doesn't really care about monopolies anymore. Thank you.
I guess you're right about that one.
I mean, I think also just to say that like there was definitely a conversation about if the company were to sell, what companies are actually big enough to buy this and rich enough to buy this, and I think that's definitely a monopoly question of like I think Meta in the mix, Microsoft, like all these companies, like it definitely is a question. It's just that again, we're talking about enforcement, right? We're talking about what the Trump administration essentially right now would be willing to do. And right now he's, got the tech CEOs lined up.
Thank you all